Alright, welcome to the part 2 of chapter 11, Crimes Against Property. If you want a review on robbery, larceny, theft, receiving stolen property, head over to part 1. In part 2, though, we are going to focus in on arson, burglary, criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and a little bit about some identity theft and cyber crimes. So thinking first at arson. Arson has an actus reus of burning, or burning by fire or explosion, to be a little more specific. Arson has a mens rea of the intent to start a fire, and the circumstance is a burning of the building. There needs to be causation and a criminal harm of damage to property. So arson does need to involve some harm. In multiple cases, the harm can just be soot or smoke damage. It doesn't actually have to catch on fire. In fact, your book kind of quotes from an Indiana arson statute, which defines arson as a person who by means of fire or explosive knowingly or intentionally damages a dwelling of another person without their consent. So merely the traditional rules that merely singeing, smoking, scorching, or discoloring wasn't enough, but Indiana appellate court agreed with the prosecutor here that smoke damage and soot were sufficient to support conviction. So the damage does not have to be extensive for it to be an arson. Now, there are degrees of arson. First degree arson looks at burning homes or other occupied structures like offices, churches, or schools where there is a danger to human life. Second degree arson looks at burning an unoccupied structure, vehicle, or boat. So we kind of distinguish based on the possibility of harm to another person. Let's get to an example here of an arson. Sally leases her home to Nick for the summer. One night in the summer, Sally sneaks back and pours gasoline, setting the home on fire. Nick makes it out. Has Sally committed arson? Does the fact that she owns the home change anything? As far as the answer here, she is guilty of arson. Arson is the willful or malicious burning of the dwelling of another. Here, Nick was renting the home for the summer, which satisfies the of another requirement in the statute. So she would be guilty of an arson here. Sally would. Now, let's get back into our slides. Criminal mischief. It used to be called malicious mischief, which involves harm to tangible property. This is looking at destruction of property, tampering with property, or deception or threat of property. These are usually defined as felonies in most states, but they do less damage to the property than arson would. Now, some examples of destruction could be burning or flooding. Tampering is any act that creates a danger to the property, even if it doesn't actually result in tangible or physical damage, but just the action itself. So if you burned a cross on someone's lawn, you could be charged with tampering under criminal mischief, even if the only thing that burned was the cross and you didn't leave any damage to the lawn or the house, that would still be sufficient. This type of crime often results from careless practical jokes. That's just kind of what frequently happens. Usually it's somebody who knows something is trying to play a prank on someone and it goes too far and it actually becomes a crime. As far as mens rea, there is not a set mens rea. It could be anything from purposeful to negligent. It just depends on the state statute to figure out how it's defined. There's an example in your book about criminal mischief. There, the defendant spray painted racial slurs all over someone's house. And he was convicted of criminal mischief, and he tried to challenge it because, he didn't want to be convicted of it. And I think some of it might have been on the sidewalk, so he was trying to maybe assess that this was not as serious. And he also argued that he did not use fire or explosions to damage the property, so he shouldn't be convicted. The court disagrees. They found it's abundantly clear that he spray painted on their home and that he intentionally tried to damage the property of this family. So he was convicted for spray painting on someone's property under criminal mischief. All right, we're going to leave that there and we're going to shift over to burglary. Burglary is the breaking and entering a building or structure with the intent to commit crime inside the building. Now, you don't have to actually commit the crime inside the building, just the intent is sufficient. Now, under the common law, burglaries could only happen at nighttime. Most states have shifted away from that requirement, so burglaries can happen in the broad daylight. Most states have also expanded the actus reus for burglary to remaining when you're not supposed to or entering when you're not supposed to. So, if you stayed overnight in a store that closed, that would be burglary because you remained behind when you were not supposed to be there. The mens rea is the intent to commit the act and the intent to commit a felony while you're inside. So this is kind of a specific intent statute. So let's look at an example over here. Freddie enters John's house through an unlocked door by turning the doorknob and walking in. He steals a PlayStation 4 and disappears into the night. Has Freddie committed a burglary? Yes. A slight breaking is enough for burglary. So turning a doorknob or lifting a latch is sufficient to burglarize. Now, if the door had been completely wide open and Freddie had just walked in and taken the PlayStation 4, different story. It would not be burglary. We'd be looking back at theft to cover that crime, but it would not be a burglary. Now here, Freddie could be charged with multiple crimes. He could be charged with burglarizing John's house, but he could also be charged with a theft because, well, technically it's a larceny because he took and carried away the property of another with intent to deprive. So that is an example of burglary. Now, your book also has an example of burglary, and it is on page 463 of the book. It's called Jewel v. State. In this case, Jewel broke into his separated wife's house. He was kicked out and she changed the locks, so he was not welcome there. She moved in with her boyfriend, and Jewel broke in at one night, and this case is really weird, guys. Just throwing that out there. So he broke in through a kitchen window, and he, while they were sleeping inside, he beat the boyfriend over the head with a 2x4 until he was unconscious, and then he amputated boyfriend's penis and fed it to the dog. And the question is, can he burglarize this home because his name was technically still on the mortgage? He was still they were still married, so he was still technically an owner of this house. And the court finds that yes, he can be convicted of burglary here. He did not live there any longer. The entry into the home was unauthorized, and he intended to commit a crime and actually completed that crime once he was inside. So that's another example of a burglary. We'll go ahead and jump back to mens rea really quick because I just do want to re-emphasize that this is a specific intent crime. Burglary is divided into different degrees. First degree usually looks at using a deadly weapon, causing a physical injury to someone else, or threaten use of like a gun. Second degree looks at being armed and causing a physical injury. In the third degree, kind of more just what we're describing here. So in the example we just had in the jewel case, he would be charged probably with a first or second degree burglary. Now, criminal trespass is generally like a less serious crime than burglary. It's the unwanted and unauthorized invasion of another person's property. So the actus reus is an unauthorized entry or unauthorized remaining with a knowing intent. A couple states have specific intent, but that's not the most common rule. There are also degrees. There's misdemeanor, entering, and remaining. There's a petty misdemeanor here. And then there's a violation for entering or remaining on no trespass property. Now, identity theft is a more common crime, as with the internet. It's really hard to catch people. The consequences to the victims are really devastating. And so this area is trying to constantly evolve. Identity theft is often lumped with cyber crimes, which are frequently intellectual property crimes. This would involve hacking or taking property by business or society. So cyber crimes are really serious as well. There's a few different examples of intellectual property crimes like computer fraud. There's examples of hacking in the book. So if this area really jumps out to you as something you're really interested in, I know a few of you are digital forensics minors. The book does a really great job, and the examples are really compelling here. We're going to go ahead and end this video lecture. If you have any questions or thoughts about the material, please feel free to let me know.